Okay, hello, welcome back to Zoink TV. I'm Andrew Weir, and today we're going to look at some texturing on Blender 2.65. And this is actually part 2 of the texturing in the beginners tutorial series. So there is a link in the description to the beginners tutorial series, and you can just look somewhere towards the bottom and you'll find these texturing videos. But this is the more advanced of the two tutorials, and we're going to cover quite a lot. It's probably going to be quite a long video. So what I'm going to do is I've got a few skipping points in the description which you can skip to if you didn't want to look at certain things. For instance, this first part I'm going to do, just image texturing, is going to be quite basic. So if you've got a specific thing you'd like to learn, look in the description, see if it's there, skip to that point. Otherwise, check out the whole tutorial if you want to. And we're going to get straight into it because I can guarantee it's probably going to be quite a long tutorial. And what I'm going to do is, firstly we're going to look at this default cube. I've deleted the default texture, which is actually just blank anyway, but I've taken it away from the default material because we've already got the material on this cube. And we're going to look at some texturing just on this cube. So you should have a render pretty much exactly the same to that. And what we're going to do is we'll add a new texture. So we've already seen all these settings, so I'm not going to mention any of that. We're just going to go to the type and change it to image or movie. And then I'll keep the preview open, but I'll close the influence and any others and keep just mapping and image open. And we're going to need to open our image. So firstly you need to download an image, so I'm going to go to CG Textures here. And this is where you're going to get most of your 2D textures from, because it's all free. They're all really good. They're all looped so that, say this road here, it can loop on forever vertically without any seams, and same for some of them, both vertically and horizontally they loop. So you can make an infinitely big wall if you really wanted to, which makes these free textures just really useful. And it's called tiled textures if you want to search that to Google as well. I'm sure you can buy some and so on, but if you can get them free here then you may as well. And so download one of them now, or just use your own image that you might have. And we're going to open it. So I've got a metal texture. It actually has a seam on it, but if we go to my metal texture, it has a kind of like a metal seam at the bottom there, which is going to affect our texture just a little bit, but not too much. So I'm going to say that's probably okay. We can render this, and we can see that result isn't very good, just as it's generated at the moment. And if it were a flat shape, say a plane, or just a normal flat shape, then that would actually work quite well, and you wouldn't have any problems with that. But because it's a cube, it's flattened it. It's generated the texture on the top there, and then it doesn't know that the sides are here, so it's kind of just squashed it down, which is why I've got these streaks down the side. And that can be changed in the generated mapping, because we've got the projection set as flat, and we can just change that to cube since we're working on a cube. Render that, and now we get a nice result. And a good thing to mention with the generated textures is it doesn't necessarily have to be a cube. For instance, if I just add the same material to this monkey, I just give that a bit of smooth shading, check that it's in the camera's view, that's good enough, and I give it the same material that we just made. Then I can render this and see that it doesn't look too bad on there. I mean, it's a really low poly monkey, so that looks a bit jagged, but apart from that, the texture doesn't look too bad on this monkey with cubic shading. So what we can do from there is we can test different types of shading on this shape. So let's go to the projection of tube, see if it looks any better on this shape. It definitely doesn't work for the cube, but I think that looks even better on the on this shape right there. So maybe you want to test that out and see if it works well on whatever shape you've got. And then sphere projection works quite nice as well, and that also works on the cube, but not as well as cubic projection. So that's how the generate stuff works, and that's how you'll basically apply these image textures sometimes. So if I've got a brick wall, I'll probably just test out cubic projection on the wall or flat projection, and if it works well, then I will just change the size, and I'll have my texture set up really quickly. But that can't work all the time, so we're going to need to learn how to UV unwrap our shapes. So I'm going to take this away, and we're going to get a new texture later. So what we're going to need to do is, firstly, I'm going to change it to UV unwrapping. So we're going to have to go to UV editing on the scenes here, which sets us up this, and that is literally just an image editor on the side here, next to the 3D view on the right. And from this point, we can go into edit mode, select our whole shape. We've got to have the whole shape selected to do this. Press U to get all the unwrapping selections, and we can go to either normal unwrap at the top, which we'll test out, giving us this solid square shape, which we don't really want because we want the net of a cube. So in your maths lessons, probably in one of the earlier years in your schools, you have probably looked at nets of shapes, and you would make a net of a shape, say a cube, and you would fold it up after you've drawn on it, and that's how you'd make your own dice or something like that in your lessons. And that's literally what Blender's doing, just virtually. So with no cuts on the shape, it's just a solid cube, and it's made us just one square to work from for the entire textures here. If we press U for unwrap as well, again, we've got a few more selections down here that could help us with some stuff if we say didn't want to apply any cuts to the shape, called seams. So I'll go to Unwrap, Smart Project Unwrap, press OK, and we can see we've got all 6 faces, and they're set out quite nicely. Though it's not quite as good as UV unwrapping it. So let's go to further down, Cube Projection. See that? It's not turned out too well, but if we select these vertexes just like we would in edit mode, we can see what it's linked. So let's press Ctrl L, and we can see that we've got each face individually. So you'll notice that I just use Ctrl L, and that's because in this mode, if you test out some of the grabbing moves and rotating and things like that that you can do in edit mode, they're probably going to work in the 2D view here. So Ctrl L works, duplicating works, and obviously scaling and rotating and grabbing works as well. And when you actually come around to doing a thing, it's probably worth checking the edit mode way of doing it first, and it's probably going to work. But besides that, there are quite a few other things to do here as well, so we'll get around to them in a second. But we're going to properly unwrap this shape now with seams, because we can see that all these generated UV unwrappings aren't working too well. So we're going to go into the edge select mode, because that means that we can select an edge easily and not get the whole faces selected. And what we're going to need is to select this edge here, this edge here, and this edge here. And if you imagine this is a solid cube of paper, if we were to cut those 3 edges, then we'd have a hinge to open here. And then we still haven't got any cuts down the side, so we can't unwrap the shape anymore. So we're going to have to go one more round, so I'll take it round another time. The hinge is now on this bottom part here. If you imagine it unfolding, we're going to reach a problem here because we haven't got a cut on either of these 2 sides, so I'll select them as well. And you don't have to select them all at once, but since we're working on our basic shape, I may as well select them all at once. And now we'll press Ctrl E to get all these edge settings. And what we can do from here is go mark the seams. So marking the seam is what we want to do. There we go, I pressed it. And now we can reselect the entire shape, bring us back our previous unwrap. Press U, go to the normal unwrap at the top, and we've got our perfect net in a T shape of our cube. So that's, I mean, it gets a little bit more advanced than that, but at the moment I hope you can kind of understand what we've done there and imagine that for every other shape that you're going to be working with, and that's pretty much the way to go. But from this point we don't need to export this UV layout or anything like that, which we'll get to in a second. We can actually do quite a few things just to fix it up or change it around. So let's pretend that this isn't perfect anymore. We've got a few different things, vertices moving around, and we want to get back to its original shape. Well, what we're going to need to do is we can use box select, just like in edit mode. Select the entire row that you want to get even again. Go to the UVs, and you can see it, all your settings are up here. Probably worth reading quite a lot of them and checking what they do. So stitch would stitch things together and so on. So not too hard to understand. But what we want to look at to just straighten this out is we're going to look at world/align, and we can see that the button to do that is press W. So we can bring up those settings, W, and we want to align it on the Y-axis, bringing us our perfect shape back there. So I'm going to grab it on the Y-axis, and I'm going to bring it back to roughly the same position. Press A, and we also want these two to be even as well, so I'm going to press W for align on the X-axis, and I'm going to move it back on the X-axis a little bit, maybe straighten these out properly now that I've moved it a little bit closer on the X-axis. We want all of them to be straight on the X-axis, but that's also ruined it a little bit, so we're going to straighten that out again. And this is how we're going to do every single fix that we're going to need to do, basically. Just straightening it out, getting the most out of our space, and aligning on different axes to get the right result. And so I know that that's pretty much the result that I want. I've changed the actual sizes of these now are a little bit different to how they were before, but that's something you have to kind of get around and get it as perfect as possible, because obviously if you're not going to get it perfect, it's best to have it straightened out. And when people actually do unwrap entire scenes, what they would do is, say if we had loads of cubes and we want them all to be different, so I'm going to press Shift D and get loads of cubes. You select the whole thing, press U for unwrap, and we'll see that we've got loads of these nets. So I'm going to have to straighten these out a little bit more. I'm going to press Control L to get the linked and rotate these. Just go bring it back straight, roughly anyway. And we can see the other two are straight, so I'm going to press Control L, and we can see that if we were to try and get the most space out of these, we probably have to rotate this on 180 to get the most use out of these textures. If we want them all to be different, is we would go like this and make sure that we're not using or losing any space. So we'd move them directly next to each other, meaning that once we've done this, we're getting the least space is being wasted. And if we weaved all the cubes together like that, then we'd get a nice end result. But if I select this one here and rotate it 180 like the others, another way to get all these cubes with the same exact texture is we can just put one on top of the other, like so. Select the linked, put one on top of the other. Of course you have to do it a little bit more accurate than I have because they're a little bit off. But once we've layered them like that, whatever we do to them, it'll be exactly the same, and we've saved a lot of room there because we didn't separate them all separately. If we were to give them the same texture anyway, they may as well be working from the same thing. And I think that pretty much leads me to, if you wanted to if you wanted to get this unwrap and work on it on Photoshop, then what we'd do is we would press export UV layout. I'll export it to my desktop with a name, and let's see on here if we can find it. There it is. Got my map, and if I open that in preview, then we can see the end result, what I've done, and there it is. We can put that into Photoshop or any image editing software that we want, and then we can take it back into our Blender, and we can go into object mode, go back to the default scene, give this a new texture, image or movie, and change it from generated to UV, and then we should have our UV map, which is what we just made, and then give it the flat projection. Works well for this, and I wouldn't suggest any others because we've UV unwrapped it, so it's going to be flat on all those shapes anyway. And we're going to have to select our image, so I'm going to go find it. We're not actually going to get any result here because it's just grey anyway, but this is how we would set it up when we've got the end result. And there's my map.png, we can see the image is there. Render this, and we can see that they've got some weird outlines because it's literally just put those UV unwraps onto this shape. And you can see that's worked well. So that's how we would do image textures once we've edited it. But next step would be to paint these textures. So we can actually paint them in Blender if we just set the UV editing back up. Then we can go into edit mode first, and we're going to need to add a new image to these textures here. You can name whatever you want. I'm going to name it paint, and I'm going to set the generated type from blank, which is going to be white or light grey, to a UV grid, which is going to have all these crazy squares and colours on it, which is just going to show us in the scene what's actually happening to our shapes. So I'm going to press OK. There's our grid, and it's still got our UV map above the grid. And what we're going to do is we're going to paint this now. So we can paint in either the 3D view or the 2D view. If we go to texture paint mode, we immediately see our textures, and we can see that they should all be the same. And if we were to go back into edit mode, change it to texture view, like that, so we can see the textures. The UV grid just allows us to see what kind of an effect that we're having on the textures, so it's quite useful because we've got loads of squares here. We know there should be squares on the shape, but if something's gone wrong, then I pull this out. Let's try and find the right one. If I pull this outwards, so you can see on the top of that cube there, what should be squares has been stretched and deformed on top of this shape. So that's how you know if you've got a problem. You can always apply the UV grid and then export the mesh, export the UV layout from there. Quite useful, but we still want to just paint these in Blender. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to texture paint mode, and then we're going to do the same on this view here. So they're both set to paint, and if we bring up the side menu here, we've got a selection of brushes and things. I think you should probably have used things like Photoshop, so you should know how to change like the radius, strength, and jitter and things. You should know what they can do. But some more important things to mention are that we can paint images. So go to texture, go new, and then select the texture that you want. And then you can actually paint it onto the shape. For instance, then I'm painting a cloud onto my shape now, the cloud texture, and we can just paint directly in this 3D view, or as we can see the effect it's having here, we can paint it on the 2D shape. So let's continue to paint here. Gives a little bit of a different effect because we want it to set, it's been set to fixed texture on this one, and we want it set to a different setting here, so let's find out. Fixed texture, and there we go, we got the fixed texture to be working from. And we can colour that in, giving all of these the same texture, and you know, if we wanted some dirt on the shape, maybe we would go back, change the colour of this to a brown, and then we're applying dirt to the shape. So now this isn't just a usual cube, it's a little bit more detailed, and we've made it pretty easily. But from this point, if I render the image, it's still got our UV Unwrap on it. So what we're going to need to do with this is we're going to need to go to Image and save the copy. So I'm going to save a copy. I'm actually going to save it directly over our previous map that I've already made. And if I have saved it properly over the map, then it should update here. But in which case, if it hasn't, we're going to need to go to the normal view, the default view, and we can just refresh the scene there. And now when I render it again, we can see in the render that we've got what we've just made. Because it's still to the same location and things. So you got to watch out for your locations of the images and the textures, because they can get lost and the Blender can't find them. So I think that's pretty much what I want to cover in textures. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and from this point you can hopefully texture and unwrap what you wanted. If you've seen my previous videos, you'll have seen the female character that I made, and actually all her textures were made in the texture paint view. So it can be used to get some more realistic textures on there, and you can change the colours and things, which makes it quite useful. But if you really want to get advanced, get Photoshop or some easy image editing software, and you can texture things however you want it from there. So thanks for watching, I'll see you in the next video.